Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're back here at the top of the hour with our first panel of the three-day conference. So my name's David Green. I'm just going to introduce the panel discussion before I ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. So for those that can't see, the panel is called Digital HR in Crisis Management and the New Future of Work. So quite a meaty topic to discuss over the next 40 to 50 minutes. Again, if you've got questions for the panelists, please use Slido. You'll see again the link at the bottom there. Go to slido.com and the code is EUR20. No, it's 20 EUR. Sorry, I've got it the wrong way around, but it will come up. So, crises. For those of us that are still fortunate to have jobs, and we mustn't forget that all the talk that I've seen in the press at the weekend of employee engagement going up, actually lots of people have lost work and been furloughed through this crisis, so we mustn't forget that. For those of us that are still in work, I think the pace has quickened, workload has gone up, and we're all getting used to a new virtual way of working. HR seems to be at the center of managing the crisis in a lot of companies that I've been speaking to. And there was an article a few weeks ago in The Economist that likened the role of the CHRO in this crisis to that of the CFO in the global financial crisis. And if HR is at the fulcrum of decision making, those organizations that have invested in people analytics and digital tools and workplaces seem to be better placed to respond to the needs of executives, managers, and employees. So I'm delighted to be joined by three accomplished people on the panel. In the top right, we've got Geetanjali Gamel, who's Head of Advanced Analytics at Johnson & Johnson. In the bottom left, we have Isabel Naidoo, who is the Inclusion and Talent Lead at FIS. And then in the bottom right, Blair Hopkins, Associate Partner for Workforce Advisory at EY. And as I said, we're going to explore the realities of what digital HR in crisis management actually means, go beyond the headlines, hopefully, and also ponder whether the pandemic, as so many commentators have opined, has accelerated the future of work. So I'm going to start, Geetanjali, with you. If you could just introduce yourself and maybe share a story of how Johnson & Johnson has developed a digital tool or been using analytics as a result of the crisis.
Yes, thank you, David, and delighted to be here with my co-panelists. I'm Geetanjali Gamel. I am with Johnson & Johnson, where I'm part of the workforce analytics team. I lead a team which manages a portfolio of advanced analytics and employee experience insights. And I think this is, a time where everyone is trying to be flexible, trying to be nimble, trying to understand how we can do whatever is possible to support employees, support each other. And at Johnson & Johnson, we have a credo, which is like our guiding principle in everything we do. And the second paragraph of that is about employees. So that's always been our focus. That continues to be our focus. And in these times, I think, it's been even more important for us to take that lens as we look at things like how are people engaging in town halls and what are the types of questions that they're asking. What are they calling in about? So we get a sense of here are the areas where we need to focus, whether it's in terms of better support or more communication, just making sure that the right resources are getting to the right people on time as fast as possible. I think that's been a focus, and everyone's rallying around it. And I think analytics also is playing an important role in that, in being able to analyze that data so we can be proactive about those topics. So it's it's all hands on deck to support everyone and make sure people have what they need.
And quickly before I go to Isabel, Geetanjali, very quickly, those topics and themes that you're analysing enable you to then go and do deeper insights and ask more questions around that, so you can really get to the kind of nub of the challenge, as it were.
Yeah. That's right, and I think that's how where data can play a role in sort of doing the right thing and doing more to help people is, for example, if you're analyzing call data about certain types of issues and you're seeing that spiking, that can give a really good leading indicator to then say maybe this is a spot where we really have to ramp up communications or provide certain resources, so it can help you get that lead. So I think very, very important to do that.
Okay, thank you, Geetanjali. So Isabel, I'll come to you now. So same question really. If you could just introduce yourself and maybe share a story of how FIS has developed something quite quickly, as I know you have in a couple of examples, to support people during this crisis.
Great. Thanks, David. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you all this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're dialing in from, or even this evening. I work for a company called FIS, who provide financial services, technology solutions to investment banks, retail banks, capital markets, and retail merchant organizations across the globe. And I run our strategic talent agenda for the organization. So my favorite line over the last few weeks and really months now has been a line that one of our heads of IT said to me. We've been working closely together on getting everyone enabled to work from home, as I'm sure many of you have. Over 90% of our workforce was able to work from home, and we had to stand that up very, very quickly. And he said to me this beautiful line. He said, "We're all testers now." Because processes that would have taken months are being stood up in the matter of days and weeks. And so you haven't got the luxury of doing robust testing. You just have to put stuff out there and say to people, you're all testers now. So I've been using that liberally as we've been deploying new solutions around talent and new offerings and making sure that we're sort of managing people's expectations that we are all testers now, and we're going to stand this up, we're going to get it out quickly. But boy, do we need your input to hone it and improve it over time, which, by the way, is something that we should be doing anyway, I think, as a go-to working model, but specifically, enabling work from home and standing up a new onboarding process actually in the course of a weekend have probably been some of the most exhausting days of our time. And I was thinking about what you said, Geetanjali. You mentioned sort of all hands on deck. Our first core value in FIS is about winning as one team. And one of the things that I've observed is just immense amounts of collaboration and teams coming together. And the IT talent is just one of many, many examples in that space.
Thanks, Isabel. And actually, obviously, the whole onboarding thing, suddenly it's virtual onboarding. So huge complexity with people effectively having to onboard from home to their new company.
Yeah, and sometimes without any equipment. So, the whole enabling people with bring your own devices and what does that look like and who can do it, who can't do it. We work in financial services, so obviously risk and security is absolutely paramount to us. Immensely complex. But, I had onboarding on my to-do list for Q3, so I've just had to accelerate that and bring it forward into the first quarter and get it done. And I kind of regret that we hadn't tackled it before. So I'm so proud of what the teams have done. I think it's incredible. And we reached out one-to-one to every single candidate who had an offer from FIS in the market, and that's been very well received by people. They really appreciated it.
Thank you, Isabel. So Blair, same question to you, although I know, having been on the internal side at EY, you're now on the external side, so you might want to share a story of a client, even if you have to anonymize it.
Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks for inviting us today. So yes, I am part of the EY practice. I lead our workforce planning, workforce analytics, and organization design competencies. And look, just hearing about the onboarding thing, I mean, we're dealing with exactly the same thing. I think in my own experience in the last few weeks, I've managed to connect with some of our own new starters probably more often than I would have when we were back at work physically. So quite an interesting change in dynamic there. There's no shortage of inspiring and amazing stories about rapid innovation at pace and driven largely by digital. I do want to share that. I think one that's particularly inspiring for me is one of the organizations we work with in Formula One sort of arena, where they repurposed their production lines to manufacture ventilators. I think most people are aware of that. But when you look behind the scenes and just what that actually means in practical terms, it really it is quite inspiring. There's something like 850 parts in a ventilator, but an ability to turn a production line around within a couple of weeks to manufacture those parts, assemble those parts, all done remotely. So all of the design works, shared by people who've never met each other. 3D printing, the latest technology there, a reduced workforce as well to boot, yet such a massive impact on society more broadly. So, bearing in mind F1 is a sport, they were amongst the first impacted by COVID-19. If you go back to the Melbourne Grand Prix, so it's even more inspiring. But look, I think the digital age that we now live in has certainly made it a lot easier for us collectively to be able to respond. And I mean, the number of stories, many of those unsung, is really quite inspiring.
Yeah, I think in some ways, I mean, what I'm hearing from all three of you is agility and speed, doing things much faster than perhaps we would have done, maybe more experimentation. And actually, it's a very good point, Blair. I mean, this is a awful crisis that we're in, of course, at the moment. But if we'd had to do it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, without all the digital tools that we have now, I think we'd all be feeling even more isolated and even more overburdened, and even more, and our companies will be in a very different place. So great. So obviously, one of the big features of the crisis is the biggest remote working experiment that there's ever been and probably ever will be. So I thought it'd be interesting to examine three areas of remote working differently with each of you, so you don't have to repeat the same answers to each other. So Isabel, I'll come to you first, because I know that one of the responsibilities at FIS is you look after learning and talent development as well. You know, how do you approach learning around this? Suddenly you've got people working from home, some of them that maybe haven't worked from home before. How do you approach learning and ongoing development of people?
Yeah, many of whom have never worked from home, actually. So and also doing it so fast. So obviously, as I said, we're all testers now. But we were helped, actually, to Blair's point, by the investments that we've been making in technology over the last, specifically 4 years, really, where we've been on a transformation journey. And we literally went live with our new learning management system on April 1st. So it was very, very well timed for us. It's a brilliant new platform that we've got. And what we did was we used the time pre-April, just very, very quickly creating new content that we didn't actually have before, centered around how do you lead in uncertain times, and also, what does it mean to work from home and some of the tools that you might need. It's also thinking about juggling priorities and so on. So we stood up some new resources very, very quickly. We created a set of webinars that were easy access. You could dial in if you weren't PC enabled for whatever reason, or you had network challenges, which can happen in some of the different parts of the different countries that we operate in, where it can be very, very challenging to connect over video or anything like that. So we stood up these resources, we created these webinars, we were helped by the fact that we had this marvelous new platform. I will say that we had so much interest, and the philosophy at FIS is around being your own chief learning officer. So the idea is always that you have a plethora of different ways that you can learn, bearing in mind that everyone learns very differently. So we've always been of that mindset. You are your own chief learning officer. In this instance, we had so much interest. We were running waiting lists. We've had to put out new offerings. I think people are hungry for new skills. And, I would always say to someone who's embarking on this, if you have the technology, that's awesome. Everyone has choice and they have lots of it. So put it out there for people and help them navigate and find what they need in a way that's simple to them. But there's no one size fits all, because circumstances are so unique at the best of times, and they're absolutely unique at these worst of times as well. So there's some of the things we've done around learning, David.
And of course, a lot of the skills that people are having to learn, or at least embed even further, are some of the softer skills, particularly with managers, I guess. And a lot of people, there's a lot of commentary about how bad it must be to suddenly have to work from home if you've not done that before. But for managers, suddenly managing remote teams that they've not managed before, that must be even more complex.
Yeah, I never call them soft skills, by the way. I'm a pedant for terminology just because it makes it sound so fluffy. They're actually the most critical skills we have, the leadership skills, or the power skills, as I like to call them. But yes, absolutely. And the World Economic Forum, last year published a whole host of skills that they saw as the most needed in 2020. And it had things like complex problem solving and so on. It had in there actually emotional intelligence, which is interesting. I think it was number 6. But if you think about it in these times, as a leader, really empathy is going to be your biggest tool, and being able to meet people where they are. And we actually have a robust sort of leadership development offering, which is pre-COVID, if you like. And the whole premise of it is about knowing yourself and knowing your team. And I think if you can get those two things right as a leader, then that will help you in managing remotely and doing large-scale remote leadership, because you still need an offering and you need people to be productive and engaged. But things are so very, very difficult for folks that you have to understand where they are. So know yourself, know your team, and you're on your merry way, really.
Great, thank you. Blair, I'm going to turn to you. I'm going to go move something slightly differently. It's more around how you organize teams and assign work in when the team's suddenly remote, and how you've either done that yourself within your own team, but also how you've helped clients maybe during these last few weeks.
Yeah, no, sure. And this is hard. I've worked remotely myself for the last 7 years and have travelled to London quite a bit, and in that time. But even I've found this really, really challenging. It's easier when there's one or two people, say, within a group that have the remote sort of working style. But when you have the entire team, it completely changes that dynamic. It's probably use an example. I like to use examples around this, and quite a recent one with our very fabulous NHS here in the UK. There's a team that was going from a Monday to Friday work pattern where everyone was in an office, has been that way for 30, 40 years, forever. And as a result of the increase in workload, needed to go to 7 days, 2 shifts a day, everybody remote to support that. And so what essentially was happening was compressing 6 months, or 3 to 6 months, if you will, of work, consultation, etc., down to 3 to 4 days. You can't wait for technology. You can't wait to get a perfect solution. You just have to get on with it. And I think the lessons learned there, and certainly in this real life example, is about just being agile, get on with it, start, learn, relaunch. Keep it low tech to start with, if that makes sense. In this particular example, utilizing Excel to manage the teams, what they're working on, sort of that Monday to Friday, refresh it each week. Over time, as they learn more and as more people come into the team, you can get to a much more sophisticated technology set to be able to do more things with it. But the real lesson there is start, be agile about it. I guess the technology is one aspect, though, but the other challenges are actually harder, and this is the piece that from a leadership point of view, and now we're talking team leaders, is probably the most difficult. When you're asking people to work differently, and you're asking them to work in a remote situation, work-life blending or whatever phrase you want to use, you're no longer just talking about the work, the tasks that we want to assign, but we're also asking people to plan that in the context of everything else they have at home. Now, at this point in time, if I have an elderly person that I've got caring duties for, if I've got a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, which I do, that introduces different challenges, which then in turn have an impact on how you manage and assign tasks as well. Everyone has a unique circumstance in this crisis right now. I think, recognizing as we go to beyond the crisis and this style of working will remain, those unique circumstances won't go away. So, we are on a very rapid learning curve into that sense. But look, just to kind of close the answer there, David, we are in a novel phase right now. It is new. We are getting to a new normal. I think there are some underlying challenges that will start to emerge. We are trading on a lot of goodwill right now, and in a very genuine sense, that goodwill is fantastic. What we will need to do, though, is figure out how to wrap that back into our processes ongoing, meeting the expectations not just of how work is organised and assigned, but also our employees are going to have a new set of expectations around flexibility. They're probably going to be a little bit more vocal about than they were, say, 3 months ago.
And so many nuances as well, as you said, in the current crisis for caregivers, for example, where there's maybe both parents are working, or maybe only one parent on your own, and suddenly you've got to combine working with being a teacher. And it's recognizing, a manager's being able to actually recognize that. And as you said, Blair, assign work, realistically and fairly to people.
Well, that's exactly right. And I think, the interview that was on with Al just prior to this one, for those who caught it, we don't want to discriminate unintentionally, and there's a real danger in doing that unless we stay on top of it. We need to understand what our employee circumstances are. We need to ask them, not just in a survey once a year. We need to ask them a little bit more continuously, and we need to respect that and build that into how we manage the work.
Thank you, Blair. So that leads on quite nicely, Geetanjali. I know you've been doing a lot of work at J&J to look at areas around employee sentiment and probably detecting some of the topics that Blair and Isabel have flagged.
Absolutely. And I want to thank Blair for the perfect segue, actually. As we were talking about, as you mentioned very, very rightly so, that, nothing about the situation is business as usual, and everyone's circumstances are unique. I also think what Isabel said about empathy, that's key. I think if anything, these times we should be learning and practicing empathy more than anything else. And one of the things I would say in that context, that we very rapidly put together as the situation began to unfold, is that we went out with a weekly employee pulse survey to understand, how is employee sentiment, um, what is it telling us about, the needs of our employees, how they're feeling. Do they have what they need in terms of, some very tangible things, but also at the same time, their general morale, their outlook, their sense of, which is so important, that holistic sense of well-being, of feeling valued. And that can really be, in these times it can be hard. Like, I can tell you from my personal example of having a young child at home and having, two people managing very busy careers is, can get challenging. And similarly, every person has some kind of unique situation, and lines between personal and professional in terms of the time of day and, how you manage your work and where you do it from, are all blurred. So it's been really helpful for us in terms of being able to serve our employees in the way that we need to, by keeping a very close, eye on engagement, on their sense of well-being, and really understanding, where it is that we can make the most impact. And as we do that, the other thing I would say, which has been helpful, is that we're looking at a number of different data sources together to try and understand that full picture. So I'd mentioned this a little bit in the opening as well, but understanding things like, we have a lot of resources, right, like, around holistic well-being and stress management. So how are those being used? Are people utilizing them? And at the same time, what are the types of things that they're calling about? So over a period of time, the trends in volume as well as the nature of calls, right? That changes as well, and that gives us good indicators of, where to ramp up information, where the right information is hitting the mark. And then I think, overall, just being able to also see how the external environment is impacting, what's happening too, right? Because again, the biggest part of this situation is what's happening all over the world with COVID-19. So to the extent that we can, layer in any external data, and again, I think, it's amazing what we have with Johns Hopkins and what those guys are doing to help everyone by, triangulating that information. So I think being able to layer that in to understand, how the situation worldwide is evolving, with COVID-19, and then in the light of that, what is it that we need to be aware of? What is it that we need to proactively be providing? So I think those are some of the ways that, we're thinking about employee sentiment and continuing to understand how employees engage.
And as a nice lead into the next question as well, Geetanjali. I mean, obviously, there's one thing to I know what you're actually looking at passive data and also active data through surveys to understand employee sentiment. How do you make sure that those are translated into actions by leaders, but also managers as well?
Yeah, I think, there is a lot of, I think this also kind of connects into what you were saying and what was being said about agility before. I think, right now, a very, very, um, heightened sense of what do we need to do, how do we act on it quickly, and because timing is so important in this situation. So I think, we're feeling really good and really confident about how, this analysis or any of the work that's happening is being viewed, is being leveraged. Our leaders are very much in tune, with this work and with, the needs of the employees. So I think it's something that, actually, this is a great sort of time to actually be really practicing agility, and I think we're seeing that across the board. So yeah, I think we're feeling really good about that.
That's good. Thanks, Geetanjali. So That throws out. I mean, again, those of you that heard the previous speaker, Thomas Chamorro-Music, talking about leadership and data sources that we can analyze, that fascinating as ever, Thomas was. We are seeing some interesting contrasts in leadership styles, both in politics and in organizations as well. And I think within HR, we've got a really important role to play in helping our leaders, but also helping maybe promote better styles over others. What analysis are each of your companies and clients in your respect, Blair, doing around areas like speed of decision making, how those decisions are being made, transparency, etc.? And what are you finding? I'm going to come to you first, Blair, because you are a Kiwi, and I think your Prime Minister is providing an excellent example of how to lead during a crisis, and certainly a comparison to other leaders, maybe, shall we say, that may well both be male, that I'm thinking of. Before I dig myself into any more trouble, I'll come to you first, Blair.
All right, we'll come back out of that one. Look, Jacinda Ardern is doing a fantastic job. I think, I'm not an expert in geopolitics. I think it's one of the most challenging positions for any nation's leader to be in right now. To me, there's kind of two aspects to this question. One is, are we making decisions based on data, or are we making quick decisions and we're comfortable with that? Because I think both those things are happening right now. With respect to database or data-led decision making, when we compare New Zealand, if you take that example, David, to say the UK or France or anywhere else, New Zealand is 3.5 hours from anywhere. They shut down the borders very quickly. Being able to contain and manage is something you can do from a decision-making point of view relatively easily. And from a cultural point of view, again, probably a little different to the European sort of approach to being free to move, etc. So when we look at it on the surface, I think we need to look below the surface really to understand, are the right decisions being made. And I think the same analogy applies to our organizations as well. If you are a UK-based organization, you will have a certain set of circumstances to navigate, to make decisions around bringing people back to work. If you're a multinational where you've got footprint in India and UK and the US and anywhere else for that matter, it's going to be slightly different set of criteria. What I am finding though is, certainly talking to a few clients and organizations in the last 4 or 5 days on this very topic, there is a feeling that decisions are being made quickly, and quite a good feeling about that. I think that's great, and I think it's true. Decisions are being made quite quickly. I think though the data will tell a different story, and perhaps we may get onto some of the other examples in a moment. But if you were to look at one simple example, this is one I know from my own experience. I go to the water cooler, I have a 5-minute discussion with another leader, and we make a decision, which we then delegate, and off we go. Right now, I put a 30-minute calendar invite in my diary. That's happening 10,000 times across an organization today. So yes, we're making decisions quickly, but I've got to tell you, my calendar is just on from 7 in the morning till 9 at night. We're making them in a different way, and I don't know how sustainable that will be. And I think as we go forward into the next stage, once this trading on goodwill sort of subsides, our risk appetite reduces, because there'll be a few mistakes made by a few leaders, without the information. I think we're going to have a fresh look at how those decisions are going to be made. And my hope, as I hand over to my fellow panel members, is that we use the data to tell the story there, because I think the data that we have at our organizations is there to be able to inform that.
Thank you, Blair. And Geetanjali, that's exactly what your team's doing, isn't it? It's providing data and insights that help support decision making. And have you also seen decisions being made quicker during the crisis? For instance, is your work getting elevated higher in the organization, maybe quicker than it was before?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think also, Blair has a good point that this focus on data, that shouldn't end, and certainly won't with just the peak of this crisis. I think even as we get out of it, there are going to be many lessons to be learned over a period of time, and maybe some of the nature of the data and the analyses that we look at will evolve. But I think there will be some long-term learnings as well out of it that we'll continue to see.
Thank you, Geetanjali. And Isabel, again, I know you've got, a big remit at FIS. You seeing decisions, what sort of decision making are you seeing, and, leadership styles, and how do you promote the...
Yeah, I mean, leadership is hard at the best of times, and these are not the best of times. And, I don't envy anyone who's in a sort of leadership role externally and publicly. I think it must be exceptionally difficult. And of course, we're all experts in hindsight, but we haven't got the luxury of hindsight at the moment. We have to make those decisions really, really fast. We're actually seeing increased agility. I've been thinking about what Blair said about, are there more meetings in the diary and so on, and the knock-on impact of that is you try and manage well-being, which of course needs to be paramount for organizations right now. So that's concerning to me if I think that, folks are sort of in back-to-back meetings without an ability to take that break or even juggle the demands of their personal lives, which is so paramount at the moment. But I do see in the way of working within FIS is that a lot of people have gone for daily stand-ups, quick connects, which actually help to make a quick decision. And the challenge of the water cooler moment, whether that's in person or virtual, so if you're in a global organization, the water cooler moment is a virtual connect anyway, so there's not that much of a shift. But the challenge of the water cooler moment is that it's not as inclusive. And so actually being forced to think quite carefully about who you need in the room to make a decision is, in my mind, I think, a more inclusive way to manage, which is equally as important as being agile, actually. But I do agree that we are not really going to know the impact of the decisions that we're making until we're through this crisis and we could do some look back. And so the more you can use data to inform, internal data and external data, to the point that the external data is awesome, and you can correlate those two, and that can help you with your decision making, and you can get real-time data feeds. And I think that will help. But I expect us to make mistakes, and I'm sure we should consider that. How do we do it in the least negative, impactful way? But I expect we will all make mistakes. It's an acid test of leadership, that's for sure.
It certainly is. I think that's a great line for that particular question. So, I mean, we're in the midst of the crisis at the moment, and all of our organisations have responded and continue to respond to the way the crisis is evolving. It's been challenging enough to do that, but now even more nuances start to come into play. The lockdowns in many countries are starting to ease, or potentially about to start to ease. And the next phase around return to the office. I did say office, not work, Isabel. I hope you please. Draws closer. And what are some of the considerations that each of your companies are making around this? So again, Isabel, I'll come to you and maybe look from a kind of an employee well-being perspective. How do you even think about that process, about when people return to the office and who? What are some of the considerations that you would make around that?
I've always been a big believer in everything that we do within HR around this idea of mass customization. So, you have to legislate at a global level, or you have to make policy at a global level or country level. But in reality, you're dealing with individuals, with human beings. And so I feel this very keenly at the moment, that we are still dealing, whether it's a return to office or whether it's enable people to work remotely, there has to be an individualized approach to some extent. But you're an organization, you're a company, you have to declare your policy. So there's this sort of conflict emerging in some ways. So what I would say, David, is, as we plan for the return to office, then thinking very carefully about what those unique circumstances are, both within the country or in some instances the state that you're talking about. So what's that external environment that you're dealing with, and also the individual circumstances, what influence very strongly how and when and how fast you can return to an office if that's what you're planning to do. I think the other thing is, one of the greatest tools that we have is communication, and what we've seen is both within our own organization and also in talking to some of my colleagues across other markets and organizations, is an increased transparency and speed of communications. And I think if we can maintain that dialogue and thinking about some of the social listening examples that we've heard today, is if we can keep up sharp communication, if we can plan a customized approach, those are some of the elements that we're thinking about to ensure that we've really got the employee well-being So, and I mean that in the literal sense of safety, as well as, the most basic level safety, as well as then broader holistic well-being at the heart of any planning that you're doing. I think that's the only way, really.
And thank you, Isabel. And Blair, if we think about it from a workforce planning and org design perspective, because I know that's what you do most of the time. What are some of the factors, or maybe some of the data sources that you might be looking at to kind of support that quite complex piece of work?
It really is complex. I think the good news is, though, is it's not new methodology. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. What we need to do is just get more rapid and be more agile about it. I'm glad you started with Isabella there, with the question around our people and bringing them back to work, because at the end of the day, that is the number one thing. At the end of the, if we don't have people, we don't have business. It's as simple as that. So from sort of data sources there, there are some very good data sources actually from official government in terms of the not just COVID impact, but more information on demographics, impact on different parts of your workforce. So I think starting with an understanding of the risk profile, if you will, around the people you have, the demographics that you have within your business over the course of the next 6 months. Overlaying on top of that, scenarios around the government guidelines as they change. Furloughing ends June 30th at this point in time. That will evolve, I'm sure. Understanding who's remote, who's not, who can work remotely, who can't, etc. But build up that profile. Start there. I think, secondly, it is about getting a tactical workforce plan together. You do need to understand your domain levers. You do need to work with the COO or the operations part of the business to understand what's really, really critical. You don't bring everyone back into a office building on day one. If you have a 20-story lift and you can put 2 people in a lift, the social distancing, there's going to be a pretty enormous queue. So there's those kinds of constraints, again, you need to build into that kind of tactical workforce plan as you bring people back over the time. I think that probably the key part of that, though, again, is scenario planning, and I probably cannot emphasize that enough. We don't know what the next 12 months will look like. We do have an idea of what the potential outcomes are. Will an immunity passport work or not? That will be answered at some point, but we can do scenarios one way or the other in advance of that. And I guess just the final thing on the workforce planning piece, David, is just looking ahead to the beyond, to the new normal, quote unquote. That's pretty important as well, because the tone you set now, the culture you create as we go through this next period of 6 to 9 months is going to last longer. People will look at you for your employer brand and go, how did they react? So when you look to that next 6-9 months plus, should I say, there are opportunities. And, I don't like the phrase, never let a crisis go to waste, especially at times like this. But at the end of the day, the world is changing. We are going to have a new normal, and there are opportunities to reset your operating model. An organization I'm working with right now is in fact doing that. They have their plans already in place for when furlough comes back to have quite a different business footprint, a different cost model, and a different way of working. So they're utilizing that opportunity. Work with the rest of your business to see where other pressures are coming in. There might be more commercial or cash flow challenges around real estate. So what does that mean for your workforce? And from a workforce planning point of view, what can you offer as an HR department to be able to realize whatever the future of the business is going to look like?
Thanks, Blair. And Geetanjali, again, looking probably from a kind of safety and health perspective, but also I guess J&J is one of the organisations that you have people who are working in office at the moment quite a lot, because you've got people working on potentially finding a vaccine for the pandemic as well. So I guess there's an additional nuance for you and your team when it comes to modelling some of these scenarios.
Right. And I think, absolutely safety and health is paramount. And we're very proud that we have people who are dedicated to working on the vaccine and anything. And that's why our focus is 100% on how do we support them. But, that being said, obviously we have only absolutely essential workers working you know in anything other than a virtual environment, and as that is happening, and I think about that return to office situation in the future, I would say that one, I think it's going to be, again, making sure that safety and health is paramount. It's not going to be one day when we just open the gates and everybody's back. I think globally, it's something that people will take very seriously, very carefully. I imagine there'll be ways in which things will be done in stages. Um, However, I think what's more interesting to me, and I think will be something that HR and people analytics and other teams will be working on in the future to understand and impact, is going to be more of like the bigger, I think, structural changes. Um, I'm sure that it's open to debate how much of the impact from this situation people think will be temporary versus more long term. I do think, this is my opinion, but I do think that there is some long term impact to things like what do workplaces look like, right? What does workplace design look like? Now that many of us who had potentially never worked virtually or thought that certain meetings had to be done in person, now that we are getting more and more used to this virtual environment, what does it mean about ways of working in the future? What does it mean in terms of travel? There's corporate travel and international travel. Like, really, what's going to be the impact on that? I think there may be a little bit longer term shift there, and we might find the different digital ways of working are actually extremely effective, and they can be leveraged more than they have in the past. So I think there's going to be some very interesting work that can be done in the future to understand how do you enable productivity, how do you enable engagement in different types of workplaces, and the idea of return to the office may be slightly different than simply returning to to the same situation that existed before.
Yeah. Thanks, Geetanjali. We've actually had a question which actually comes up. We've had a few questions actually, but this question comes in quite well now. Actually, with a question that we were going to ask. So, what does this? The question we were going to ask is, what does this mean for the future and the skills that we need in HR and in our leaders? Has the crisis accelerated the future of work? And actually, Vahid came up with a nice question here around, what does this mean around the reskilling agenda that we've maybe got within our organisations? If the future of work has been accelerated as well, does that mean that the reskilling agenda is even gaining in even more prominence now? So, Geetanjali, I'll come to you again to answer that first, so you're not last again.
No worries. I think, I think this is a really important topic. And the way I've been thinking about skills and kind of skills of the future is also, one, how do we enable people to be more nimble? And I think on the other end of that is also, how do we get a better understanding of the skills and capabilities and needs within the organization? And the example that jumps to my mind is that, for example, in the situation we're in right now, there may be groups of people who are very skilled, and can contribute a whole lot, and suddenly, because of the nature of their work, it may not be possible to just as easily transfer it into a virtual situation. So at the same time, if we were now had a good handle on knowing what their skill set and their capabilities were, and where there was need in other parts of organization for that, where they could lend those skills, I think that could be a great way to help them feel valued and engaged, and at the same time have good outcomes for the organization. So again, I think there's part of it is about reskilling and thinking about how do we be more agile and nimble, but I think it's also about us understanding skills and how they can quickly be flexible and deployed in other places.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. We had a great example this morning where Thomas Rasmussen was speaking and Sally Smith from National Australia Bank, how they used analytics to understand they need a huge demand, suddenly with customers now phoning in or doing emails, and they found that they were short of people, so they redeployed people who had those skills quickly to support the customer demand in those areas. Isabel, same question to you. What does this mean for the future of work, and all skills we need in HR as well? Are they going to change, or are certain demands going to be in high demand?
I think the skills deployment, by the way, is a really interesting one, because a lot of companies aren't ready, so they don't have a good picture of skills, or they don't have a good mechanism to easily share skills. So even if you have a diversified portfolio, you may not have the mechanism to then really quickly take advantage of that, which you can do if you're a global organization. You're seeing softening in some parts, or increased demand in others, to the example you just gave. So that is something that I think we'll see accelerated across multiple different organizations. I mean, look, the future of work, the digital side of it, clearly is being accelerated. We've got these amazing examples out there in the market, and we've got some ourselves of standing stuff up. We're all testers now in very short spaces of time, and I do think that there is an element of, if you're already a digital organization, you were better prepared in some ways for the digital way of working, if that's the route that you're going down. But I also think that there's always been a conflict with the future of work and this notion of digital is going to answer everything. I actually think what this has shown and brought into sharp relief is that the human being, not doing, nature of the people that we employ is actually really, really important. And at the end of the day, like I said earlier, the role of the leader doesn't change, and so much depends on the leadership that you have within an organization, for the employee experience, for the client experience, for the the productivity, the engagement of the teams that you're running. And a leader needs to know themselves, they need to know their teams, and I think in any future of work that remains the same. So I do see a shift. I do think that remains. I do, as I said earlier, see an emphasis on empathy. I think that will come through, and the customized experience that we need to create for people. And for HR itself, I think this will probably help us accelerate the journey around embedding data to, using data to inform decision making, which is the mission we have in our workforce analytics team within FIS, because with data, you can ground, at least to some extent, ground decisions in something quite tangible, which I think people are looking for in a time of, in such a VUCA time. Feels like you want something that can be quite specific, and data can help with that. So I do think it'll probably help the journey that many of us are already on.
Thanks, Isabel. And Blair, same question to you, really, and maybe the sort of nuance, because I guess workforce planning has already become more complex and more challenging, I guess, because of this kind of shift from jobs to skills and tasks that we hear a lot about. I mean, presumably that's just going to accelerate and add to the mix.
It is, David, and look, I think just hearing Isabel and Geetanjali there, I agree with everything they say, and I do want to kind of be additive to that. It's funny how supermarket delivery drivers and workforce planners are all of a sudden needed by everybody, yet not really valued up until now. And I think the big difference for me that I see going forward is the value of skill will be less. I think the definition of value of skill will change as a result. And, there are, let's go forward 3 or 4 months. The cleaning regime for surfaces like lift wells, high volume traffic areas is going to change. Maybe 2 hours isn't enough. So all of a sudden the job that does that has a much more important value proposition to the organization. So I think that definition will change, and along with that, obviously, then the insight we need to be able to manage our workforce to make sure we're getting the right people in also will change. I'll finish on an example that is kind of the antithesis of what we're talking about here. Post 9/11, we'll all remember it impacted the airlines and international travel, so airports the most. And how much value do we put in, as a society, if you will, the security guards at the gate? Not a lot. I think if we do that this time around, we've missed a trick.
Thanks, Blair. Well, we're on to the final question. We have a minute, so you've got about 10 seconds each. It is a quick fire round, though. We're a few months into the crisis. What is the one skill, technology, or process you have now that you wish you'd had back at the start of 2020? Or maybe you don't even have it yet. So, Isabel, I'll come to you first.
Primary school maths teaching.
Perfect. I wish I had it too. Blair, to you.
Oh God, that's a great one. I've got the same thing. Now, for me, it's working in an agile way, not just saying it, but actually doing it. It's hard. It's really hard.
And Geetanjali?
Yeah, I'm going to say very similar to Isabel, keeping a 6-year-old engaged and entertained while still doing my job.
Yeah, and I'm very lucky that I haven't had to do the teaching, because Sarah, my wife, has been doing that. But yeah, I've had to learn how to play the Switch and Fortnite with my son to spend time with him. So, Anthony, Isabel, Blair, thank you very much. A really great discussion. Thank you for spending the time with us, and I hope the audience enjoyed it. Thank you.